They locked me out of my own property, so I got their entire HOA fired. The HOA blocked the gas line repair, ignored a public safety hazard, and thought they could bully me into submission. So I fought back, exposed their corruption, took over their meetings, and led the vote that got them all kicked out. Now, the gate is gone, the HOA is reformed, and they'll never mess with the wrong homeowner again. Ethan Parker had always valued his privacy. His modest suburban home, nestled at the very edge of the neighborhood, was a deliberate choice. Unlike most of his neighbors, he wasn't bound by the iron grip of the Maplewood Homeowners Association. That had been a major selling point when he bought the house. No arbitrary rules about mailbox colors, no overpriced HOA fees, and most importantly, no power-hungry board members micromanaging his property. While others in the neighborhood grumbled about the HOA's endless restrictions, Ethan remained blissfully unaffected. He mowed his lawn when he felt like it, parked his truck in his driveway without worry, and never once had to deal with condescending letters about the length of his grass. For years, he had lived comfortably alongside the HOA's domain, convinced that as long as he stayed out of their business, they'd stay out of his. That illusion shattered on a crisp October morning. It started with a smell. Faint at first, just a slight, almost metallic tang in the cool autumn air. Ethan noticed it as he stepped outside to take out the trash. At first, he thought nothing of it. Maybe someone was using a gas-powered tool, or perhaps it was just the wind carrying in a scent from down the street. But later that afternoon, as he walked past the small shed near the back of his property, the smell was stronger. Something wasn't right. Frowning, Ethan crouched near the gas line that ran into his house, his fingers hovering over the connection point. The air felt heavier there, tinged with that unmistakable, artificial scent utility companies added to natural gas. His gut told him not to ignore it. Pulling out his phone, Ethan dialed the gas company's emergency line. After a few rings, a customer service rep answered. "Hey, I think I might have a gas leak near my house," Ethan explained, keeping his voice calm but firm. "It's not inside, but I can smell it out by the utility shed." The representative took his details and assured him they'd send a technician for an inspection as soon as possible. By late afternoon, a white service van pulled up in front of his house, and a technician in a navy blue jumpsuit stepped out, toolbox in hand. The man introduced himself as Mike, a no-nonsense kind of guy with years of experience. Ethan led him to the back of the property, explaining what he had noticed. Mike knelt by the gas line, ran a handheld detector along the pipe, and frowned as a faint beep confirmed the presence of gas. "Good thing you called," Mike muttered, wiping his hands on a rag. "Looks like a section of the main gas line in the easement behind your property is corroded. Needs to be replaced before it gets worse." Ethan exhaled, relieved he hadn't brushed it off. "How bad are we talking?" Mike stood up, dusting off his knees. "It's not an emergency yet, but it will be if it's left alone. A crew will be out in 2 days to replace the damaged section. Should be a straightforward fix." That was good enough for Ethan. He thanked the technician and watched as the service van drove away, feeling a sense of reassurance. The problem had been caught early, professionals were handling it, and in 2 days, it would be just another routine home repair. At least, that's what he thought. Little did he know, his real problem wasn't the gas leak. It was the Maplewood HOA. And in just 48 hours, they would make it clear that Ethan Parker's peaceful, HOA-free life was about to end. Ethan pulled into his driveway 2 days later, expecting to see the gas repair crew already at work. Instead, he found 3 workers standing around their truck, arms crossed, looking more frustrated than busy. As he stepped out of his truck, the crew's foreman, a stocky man in his 50s with a sun-beaten face, walked up to him. His expression wasn't promising. "You the homeowner?" he asked. Ethan nodded. "Yeah, Ethan Parker. What's the problem?" The foreman exhaled sharply, motioning for Ethan to follow him toward the back of the property. "Come take a look." Ethan's stomach sank as soon as he rounded the corner. The easement, the open pathway behind his yard where the underground utilities ran, was no longer open. In its place stood a brand new metal gate, reinforced with thick bars and a heavy-duty padlock. Worse, bolted onto the gate was a small, smug-looking sign that read, "Maplewood HOA property, authorized personnel only." Ethan clenched his jaw. The easement had never been HOA controlled. It was a shared space, designated for public utilities, and any homeowner or service crew had a right to access it. This was new. "What the hell?" Ethan muttered, running his hand over the cold metal bars. "This wasn't here during our inspection," the foreman said, shaking his head. "We need to get to that gas line, but we're locked out." Ethan took a deep breath, trying to keep his frustration in check. There's got to be a way around it. Maybe I can cut through my yard. The foreman shook his head again. Gas company regulations. We can't dig or start work without proper easement access. Too much liability. Until this gate is open, our hands are tied. Ethan fumed. This can't be legal, he muttered, stepping back and scanning the gate for any sign of weakness. I don't know about legal, the foreman said, scratching the back of his head, but I do know one thing. If that leak gets worse and we can't fix it, it could turn into a real problem. You need to get this sorted. Ethan turned back to the gate, his anger bubbling beneath the surface. This wasn't just an inconvenience. This was deliberate. The HOA knew they had no control over the utility easement. Yet, they had installed this gate anyway, likely betting that no one would fight them on it. Well, they had bet on the wrong guy. Ethan's gaze darkened. I'll handle it. The foreman gave him a nod. Call us when it's open. We'll be back. The crew packed up and drove off, leaving Ethan staring at the gate in disbelief. The HOA had overstepped big time, and they were about to learn that Ethan Parker wasn't the kind of homeowner who backed down. Next stop, the Maplewood HOA office. Ethan didn't waste time. As soon as the gas crew left, he climbed into his truck and drove straight to the Maplewood HOA office. The building was a small, beige structure near the neighborhood's clubhouse, its exterior just as dull and lifeless as the people who ran it. A few neatly trimmed hedges lined the walkway, and a laminated sign on the door read, Office hours, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. No walk-ins without appointment. Ethan ignored it and pushed open the door anyway. Inside, the air smelled faintly of printer ink and cheap coffee. The office itself was sterile, beige walls, gray carpeting, and a single reception desk where a woman sat typing away at a computer. Linda Shaw. He recognized her from the occasional neighborhood notices that showed up in his mailbox. HOA secretary. Mid-40s, sharp bob haircut, and an expression that somehow managed to be both fake-friendly and passive-aggressive at the same time. She looked up from her screen, offering a tight, insincere smile. Good afternoon. How can I help you? Ethan wasted no time. I need to speak to someone about the new gate blocking the gas line easement. Linda's smile immediately vanished. Are you a member of the HOA? She asked, her tone suddenly cool and professional. Ethan folded his arms. No, but that easement isn't HOA property. It's for public utilities. I have a gas leak that needs repairs, and the gas company can't access the line because of your padlock gate. Linda's lips pursed, and she tapped her keyboard a few times, glancing at her screen. The gate was installed to ensure safety and prevent unauthorized access to HOA-maintained areas, she said in a robotic, well-rehearsed tone. Ethan narrowed his eyes. It's not an HOA-maintained area. That's a utility easement. The gas company has a legal right to access it. So do I. Linda sighed dramatically and leaned back in her chair. Mr. Parker, if you're not a member of the HOA, then I'm afraid the easement really isn't your concern. Ethan felt his temper spike. This is an emergency, Linda. There's a gas leak. You can't just block off access like this. She gave him a smug smile. The board has already ruled on the matter. If you'd like to request access, you'll need to submit a formal petition and attend the next HOA meeting for approval. Ethan clenched his fists. And when's the next meeting? Linda's grin widened. Second Tuesday of next month. Ethan stared at her in disbelief. That's almost 5 weeks from now. Yes, she said, tilting her head with a fake expression of sympathy. Unfortunately, we can't make exceptions for non-members. Ethan took a deep breath, forcing himself to stay calm. This woman was enjoying this, enjoying the power trip. He pulled his phone out. Fine, I'll get the gas company to handle this legally. Linda's smirk faded slightly. Ethan turned and walked toward the door, but just as he reached it, she called after him in a sing-song voice. Have a nice day, Mr. Parker. He didn't respond. He was too busy dialing the gas company, and if the HOA thought this was over, they were dead wrong. Ethan stormed back into his house, slamming the door behind him. His hands were still clenched from the infuriating conversation with Linda Shaw. These people really think they can do whatever they want. Fine. If they wanted a fight, they were going to get one. He set his phone down on the kitchen table and pulled out a thick binder filled with every document he had received when purchasing the house. Deeds, property surveys, utility easement agreements, everything. If the Maplewood HOA thought they could push him around, They had severely underestimated just how stubborn he could be. For the next 2 hours, Ethan pored over every document. It didn't take long to find what he was looking for. The utility easement behind his property was designated as public infrastructure, which meant that by law, no private entity, including the HOA, could restrict access to it. There it was, in black and white. Ethan smirked. Gotcha. He snapped a picture of the relevant section and immediately emailed it to the gas company's legal department. He also attached a detailed explanation of what had happened, including how the HOA had illegally blocked access and refused to cooperate. Not even 20 minutes later, his phone rang. Mr. Parker? This is Tina Lawson from the gas company's compliance team. We got your email. This is highly concerning. Ethan leaned back in his chair. So, what happens now? Tina sighed. Well, unfortunately, we can't just break the lock. But legally speaking, the HOA has no right to block that easement. They're in direct violation of state utility access laws. Ethan's lips curled into a satisfied grin, then forced them to open it. We'll escalate the matter, Tina assured him. I'll be filing a formal complaint with the city's zoning office. They take easement violations seriously. Ethan's grin widened. Good. But then Tina hesitated. That being said, legal processes take time. Even if the city rules in our favor, it could be weeks before we get a resolution. Ethan's jaw tightened. I don't have weeks. That gas line is leaking now. I know, she admitted. I'd recommend pursuing another avenue in the meantime. Ethan ran a hand down his face. He already knew what that meant. He had to go back to the HOA. That afternoon, Ethan marched right back into the HOA office, this time with a thick folder of evidence under his arm. Linda Shaw looked up as he entered, her expression instantly shifting to annoyance. Mr. Parker, she greeted, her voice dripping with false sweetness. What a surprise. Ethan slapped the folder down onto the desk. I have legal documentation proving that the HOA has no authority over that easement. You need to unlock that gate. Linda didn't even glance at the documents. Instead, she folded her hands and gave him a sickly sweet smile. As I told you yesterday, the board has already ruled on this matter. Then overturn it, Ethan shot back. This is a violation of state law. If you don't comply, you'll be facing legal consequences. Linda's smile didn't even falter. You're welcome to bring it up at the next HOA meeting, she said, feigning innocence. As I mentioned, that will be on the second Tuesday of next month. Ethan gritted his teeth. He had proof. He had the law on his side. And still, she was stonewalling him. Linda gave a mocking little sigh and stood up from her desk. If you'd like, I can pass your concerns to the board. No, Ethan interrupted. I want to talk to them. Now. Linda laughed softly, shaking her head. I'm afraid the board doesn't take unscheduled meetings with non-members. Ethan took a step forward, lowering his voice. If that gas leak gets worse and something happens, I'm holding you personally responsible. I'm sure the city would love to know that you're obstructing emergency repairs. For the first time, Linda's smugness wavered, but just as quickly, she regained her composure. If you have a legal complaint, Mr. Parker, feel free to file it. But this office has nothing more to say to you. Ethan's fingers curled into fists. These people don't care about laws. They care about power. Fine. If the HOA wanted to play dirty, so could he. Ethan turned on his heel and walked out without another word. Back home, he sat at his kitchen table, staring at the easement beyond his backyard. The gas line was still leaking, and he was out of peaceful options. He reached for his phone and scrolled through his contacts. If the HOA was going to block access to a public utility, then he was going to block something of theirs. It was time to make a few strategic calls. And by the time he was done, the HOA would regret ever messing with him. Ethan sat in his kitchen, staring out at the backyard where the locked gate loomed like a challenge. He had played by the rules. He had presented the legal documents, spoken to the gas company, and tried reasoning with the HOA. None of it had mattered. They weren't just ignoring him. They were actively trying to break him down, treating him like some nuisance they could brush off. But they had underestimated him. If the HOA wanted to weaponize bureaucracy against him, he'd turn the tables. They had blocked access to the easement, but Ethan had something they didn't account for: control over a part of their infrastructure. He pulled out his property documents again, flipping through pages until he found what he was looking for. The Maplewood HOA sewer system ran straight through his backyard, buried beneath a narrow strip of land that, legally, was his to maintain. The pipe was a shared drainage line that connected most of the neighborhood's homes, including those of every HOA board member. And just like they had locked him out of the easement, He had the legal right to cut off access to his portion of the sewer system as long as it didn't interfere with city property. By the time morning came, Ethan had his plan in place. He drove to the local hardware store, picking up a sturdy pipe cap and a set of tools. It wasn't a complicated job. The access hatch to the sewer line was right near his fence, covered by a removable metal panel. Within minutes, Ethan had the panel off and was looking at the drainage pipe that ran beneath his yard. With a few careful twists of his wrench, he secured the cap onto his section of the pipe, sealing it off completely. It was temporary, easily removable, but it would cause a huge headache for the HOA. At first, nothing happened. The morning passed quietly, the neighborhood as peaceful as ever. Then, around noon, the complaints started. A handful of HOA members were suddenly dealing with slow drains, backed-up sinks, and, in a few unlucky cases, overflowing toilets. The HOA office was in chaos. Ethan didn't even have to check the neighborhood Facebook page. He could hear it from his own yard. He watched from a distance as frustrated residents stopped by the HOA building, demanding answers. Linda Shaw, always composed and smug, was now clearly overwhelmed, her phone ringing off the hook as she tried to pacify angry homeowners. Ethan had to resist the urge to smirk. He didn't enjoy inconveniencing his neighbors, but the HOA board needed a taste of their own medicine. They had ignored a literal gas leak. Maybe now they'd understand what it felt like to be put on hold while dealing with a serious problem. The real fun began a few hours later when there was a knock at his door. Ethan opened it to find Rick Coleman, the HOA president himself, standing on his porch. The man looked livid, his face flushed with frustration. "Mr. Parker," Rick started, his voice tight with forced calm. "We need to talk." Ethan stepped outside, arms crossed. "About what?" Rick exhaled sharply. "We have a situation with the neighborhood sewer system, and the issue seems to be coming from your property." Ethan raised an eyebrow, feigning surprise. "Really? That's strange. I wasn't aware the HOA sewer line ran through my yard." Rick's jaw clenched. "Don't play games with me, Parker. We both know you've done something. We need access to fix it." Ethan shrugged. "I see. So when the HOA blocks access to a public gas line, that's just policy, but when I do something to my own property, it's suddenly an emergency?" Rick's face turned red. "You're blackmailing us." Ethan leaned in slightly. "No, I'm standing up for my rights. You locked me out of an easement that you have no legal claim to. I had a gas leak, and you refused to act. Now, suddenly, you're at my door when your sewer system is backed up? Interesting." Rick took a deep breath, clearly trying to control his temper. "You do realize this could escalate into legal action, right? Do you really want to take on the entire HOA?" Ethan didn't blink. "I'm not the one breaking the law. Blocking a public utility easement is illegal. If you want to take this to court, be my guest. But I guarantee you, the HOA won't come out on top." For a moment, Rick looked like he wanted to argue, but then his shoulders dropped slightly. He knew Ethan was right. The HOA had pushed too far, and now they were feeling the consequences. Finally, in a quiet, defeated voice, Rick muttered, "I'll call an emergency meeting with the board." Ethan nodded. "Good. And while you're at it, unlock the dam gate." Rick turned and walked away without another word. Ethan watched him go, feeling the satisfaction of a battle well fought. The HOA had wanted a power struggle, and now they had one. And this time, they were the ones losing. The next morning, Ethan sat on his porch with a fresh cup of coffee, watching the neighborhood fall into chaos. Complaints about slow drains and overflowing toilets had reached a boiling point. Homeowners were furious, and the HOA was scrambling to control the situation. From where he sat, Ethan could see people standing outside the HOA office, waving their arms in frustration. Linda Shaw was stuck on the phone, looking frazzled, and the HOA's perfectly curated sense of control was beginning to crack. By noon, Ethan got the knock on his door he had been expecting. Rick Coleman, the HOA president, stood there, looking like he had aged 10 years overnight. His usual smugness was gone, replaced with a stressed, almost desperate expression. "Ethan," he started, skipping any pretense of politeness. "We need to fix this now." Ethan leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "Fix what, Rick? You mean the sewer backup? The same one that, as it turns out, runs through my private property?" Rick inhaled sharply, his patience already gone. "Don't play games with me. You know exactly what's happening. The whole neighborhood is dealing with plumbing issues, and the blockage is coming from your section of the sewer line." Ethan gave him a slow nod. "And 2 days ago, I told you that I had a gas leak in my backyard and that your unauthorized gate was blocking access to the easement. You didn't care then. Why should I care now? Rick's eye twitched. This is different. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Oh? How so? Rick's fist clenched at his sides, but he forced himself to stay calm. Because this affects the entire neighborhood. Ethan took a slow sip of his coffee. You're right. It does. And so does a gas leak. For the first time, Rick looked uncertain. He had expected Ethan to cave, to be overwhelmed by the pressure. But instead, Ethan was standing his ground, completely unfazed. This is getting out of hand, Rick said, his voice quieter now, more controlled. You made your point. But if this goes on much longer, people are going to demand answers, and it won't just be you they're looking at. It'll be the HOA, too. Ethan smirked. There it is, the crack in Rick's armor. He stepped forward slightly, then unlocked the gate. Rick hesitated, his pride visibly fighting against his common sense. Ethan didn't move. You and I both know you don't have the legal authority to block that easement. So, I'll make this easy for you. Unlock the gate, let the gas company do their job, and I'll make sure the sewer issue goes away. Or, you can keep playing your game, and I'll make sure the city gets involved, officially dot. Rick's jaw tightened. He was out of options, and he knew it. After a long moment, he exhaled through his nose. Fine. I'll call an emergency meeting with the board. Ethan shook his head. No meetings. No delays. This happens today. Rick stared at him for a moment, then begrudgingly nodded. I'll make the call. A few hours later, Ethan stood in his backyard, watching as an HOA maintenance worker cut the padlock off the gate. The barrier that had caused all this trouble clattered open, and just like that, the gas company had access to the easement again. The repair crew wasted no time. They were on site within the hour, digging and replacing the damaged section of the pipe. Ethan stood there with his arms crossed, watching the gas company work while a few HOA board members lingered nearby, looking frustrated but powerless. Linda Shaw walked up to him, her arms folded. You think you won, don't you? Ethan turned to her, completely calm. No, Linda, I know I did. She narrowed her eyes, then turned and walked away without another word. Ethan watched her go, then pulled out his phone and made one last call. The HOA had fixed his problem. Now, it was time to make sure they never tried this again. The gas line was repaired, the danger was gone, and the easement was accessible again. By all accounts, Ethan had one. But as he sat on his back porch the next morning, drinking his coffee, he couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. He didn't have to wait long for confirmation. Around midday, he stepped outside to grab his mail and found a crisp white envelope taped to his front door. The Maplewood HOA logo was printed in bold at the top, and just from the overly formal look of it, Ethan knew exactly what it was. He tore it open and scanned the first few lines. Mr. Parker, this letter serves as formal notice that your recent actions have violated Maplewood HOA regulations. Your unauthorized interference with shared neighborhood infrastructure has caused significant disruption, and the board is now seeking restitution for damages caused by your intentional obstruction of the HOA-maintained sewer system, Ethan laughed out loud. They were serious? After everything they had done, they were trying to turn this around on him? The letter continued, demanding that he issue a written apology and compensate the HOA for the damages caused by the blocked sewer line. A fine of $5,000 was mentioned, along with a veiled threat of legal action if he refused to comply. Ethan exhaled slowly, rolling his shoulders back. They were still trying to bully him. Fine. If they wanted to drag this into the legal arena, he'd be more than happy to meet them there. He grabbed his phone and made a call. Amanda Hayes, a confident voice answered. What can I do for you, Ethan? Amanda was a no-nonsense attorney who had helped him with a minor real estate issue years ago. She was sharp, direct, and had zero tolerance for HOA overreach, which made her the perfect person for this. Ethan explained everything, reading off parts of the letter as Amanda listened. When he finished, there was a brief silence before she chuckled. They're bluffing, she said. They don't have a case. Ethan smirked. I figured. But humor me. Why? Amanda sighed. First of all, you're not a member of the HOA. Their bylaws don't apply to you, so they have no authority to fine you. Second, that sewer line runs through your property. As long as you didn't interfere with city infrastructure, you were well within your rights to modify the section you control. And third, she paused for dramatic effect, they blocked a public utility easement. If anyone should be facing legal trouble, it's them. Ethan felt his tension ease. He had known they were grasping at straws, But hearing Amanda completely dismantle their argument made it all the more satisfying. "So, what's my move?" he asked. "Simple," Amanda said. "You're going to draft a response. You'll formally reject their claims, remind them that their authority doesn't extend to non-members, and then, just to twist the knife, you'll mention that you're considering legal action for their obstruction of the gas line repairs." Ethan grinned. "That'll get their attention." "Oh, it will," Amanda agreed. "And if they push back, let me know. I'd love to see them try to explain their actions in court." By the end of the day, Ethan had typed out his formal response, attaching copies of his property deed, the utility easement laws, and the state regulations that proved the HOA had overstepped. When he dropped off the letter at the HOA office, he made sure to hand it directly to Linda Shaw. She took it without a word, her usual smugness replaced with something colder, harder. "You think this is over?" she asked, voice low. Ethan smiled. "I think you're running out of moves, Linda." She didn't reply. She just turned and walked back into the office, the envelope clutched tightly in her hands. Ethan watched her go, then stepped outside into the warm afternoon air. The HOA wasn't done fighting, but neither was he. Ethan had expected the HOA to keep pushing, but what he hadn't expected was how quickly the rest of the neighborhood started paying attention. Word of his battle with the HOA spread like wildfire, and soon, homeowners who had never spoken out before began sharing their own stories. At first, it was just quiet grumbling, mentions of unfair fines, arbitrary rule changes, and absurd restrictions, but then, the complaints got louder. Some residents stopped him in the grocery store, thanking him for standing up to the HOA. Others began voicing their frustrations in the neighborhood Facebook group, posting about the board's favoritism, misuse of funds, and history of ignoring residents' concerns. Ethan wasn't the only one who had been fed up. He had just been the first to fight back. That's when Susan Carter stepped in. Susan had lived in the neighborhood for over 20 years, a retired teacher with a reputation for being friendly but firm when necessary. She had been one of the few people openly supporting Ethan throughout his battle with the HOA, and now she saw an opportunity to challenge the board directly. She knocked on his door one evening, clipboard in hand, and got straight to the point. "We need your help," she said as Ethan let her in. "The HOA has been out of control for years, but most people have been too afraid to speak up. That's changed now. You showed them they're not invincible." Ethan frowned, sitting across from her at the kitchen table. "What are you thinking?" Susan leaned forward. "We're calling for a vote to replace the board. Enough people are angry, and we've got momentum, but we need someone like you to help mobilize the community. People trust you now." Ethan hadn't fought the HOA for the sake of becoming some kind of leader, but the more he thought about it, the more he realized Susan was right. The HOA had gotten away with too much for too long. If they didn't fix the system, it would just happen again. Over the next few weeks, Susan and a growing group of homeowners organized meetings, collected signatures, and built a case against the current board. Ethan helped where he could, attending gatherings and sharing his story, but it was Susan who led the charge. The HOA, predictably, fought back hard. They circulated their own flyers, warning residents that removing the board would lead to chaos and declining property values. They spread rumors that the movement was being led by troublemakers who wanted to dismantle the HOA entirely. They even tried to invalidate the petition on a technicality, but this time, they didn't have the power to shut people down. The neighborhood had seen too much, and the board had lost its grip on the community. The turning point came at a town hall meeting organized by Susan and the reformers, held at the local elementary school gym. Ethan stood at the front of the packed room, looking out at dozens of frustrated residents, some of whom had never attended an HOA meeting before. When it was his turn to speak, he kept it simple and direct. "I moved into this neighborhood because I wanted a quiet place to live. But over the past few months, I've learned that if you don't stand up for yourself, people like the HOA will walk all over you. This isn't just about a gate or a sewer line. It's about who gets to decide what happens in our community. Do we want a neighborhood where decisions are made behind closed doors? Or do we want a place where everyone's voice matters?" The crowd erupted into applause. Even the people who had been on the fence nodded along, clearly moved by what was happening. The HOA board members sat off to the side, silent, watching as control slipped through their fingers. 2 weeks later, the vote was held, and the results were a landslide. Susan and her team of reformers won overwhelmingly, and the old HOA board, including Rick Coleman and Linda Shaw, was removed from power. The community had spoken, and for the first time in years, they had won. Ethan had expected the town hall meeting to be heated, but he hadn't expected it to turn into a full-scale takedown of the HOA board. The gymnasium was packed. More residents than anyone had ever seen at an HOA meeting, and the mood was tense. The board members sat at the front table, trying to maintain an air of authority, but it was clear they were on the defensive. People weren't just angry anymore. They were done being pushed around. Susan Carter stood at the microphone first, laying out a clear, damning case against the HOA's leadership. She presented financial reports that showed how HOA fees had mysteriously increased over the years while no real improvements had been made in the neighborhood. She called out multiple instances where the board had made decisions behind closed doors, completely ignoring the concerns of the residents they were supposed to represent. And, most importantly, she had testimonies from homeowners who had been unfairly fined, harassed, or ignored when they tried to challenge the board's rulings. Then it was Ethan's turn. He walked up to the mic, calm and steady, and turned to face the board. "I never planned on being involved in any of this," he started, his voice carrying through the gym. "I just wanted to fix a gas leak. But instead, I had to fight the HOA for weeks because they thought they could control something that was never theirs to begin with. And I'm not the only one. How many of you have had to deal with unfair fines? How many of you have tried to get answers and been ignored?" A ripple of agreement went through the crowd. People started nodding, murmuring to each other, some even shouting their own frustrations at the board. Rick Coleman sat at the front table, his jaw clenched so tight it looked like it might crack, while Linda Shaw furiously scribbled notes, as if she could somehow write her way out of this disaster. "The truth is," Ethan continued, "the HOA board isn't working for the homeowners. They're working for themselves. And tonight, we get to decide if that continues." The audience erupted into cheers. The board tried to regain control, but it was too late. Homeowners lined up at the microphone, one after another, detailing years of mistreatment, financial mismanagement, and selective enforcement of rules. By the time the last speaker stepped down, the board members looked visibly shaken. Then came the vote. Residents filled out their ballots, casting their decision on whether to remove the current board. The results were announced an hour later, and the outcome wasn't even close. The entire HOA board was removed from power by a landslide. Rick Coleman and Linda Shaw stormed out without a word, their faces red with humiliation. New leadership was sworn in that night, with Susan Carter as the new president, promising immediate changes. The first order of business? Rolling back the restrictive policies and opening HOA decisions to public transparency. Ethan watched it all unfold from the back of the room, arms crossed, feeling something he hadn't felt in weeks: relief. The HOA had fallen, and the neighborhood had finally taken back control. Ethan woke up the next morning to something strange: silence. No emails from the HOA. No warnings taped to his door. No smug comments from Linda Shaw or passive-aggressive letters about fines that didn't apply to him. For the first time in weeks, it felt like the neighborhood was at peace. The Maplewood HOA had fallen, and in its place, Susan Carter and her new board had wasted no time cleaning up the mess. Within days, they reversed the most absurd rules, including the ridiculous restrictions on access to shared infrastructure. They introduced transparency measures, ensuring that no future decisions would be made behind closed doors. Homeowners were now invited to meetings, given an actual say in how things were run. And most importantly, no more power trips. Ethan attended one of the first open board meetings out of curiosity, sitting in the back and watching as Susan actually listened to people, taking notes and discussing concerns like a real leader. It was strange seeing an HOA meeting that wasn't a battlefield, but a conversation. After the meeting, Susan walked over to him, holding a bottle of wine with a smile. "You did good, Ethan," she said, handing it over. "This neighborhood owes you more than you know." Ethan smirked, tucking the bottle under his arm. "I think we all did good. It's nice to finally feel like we're on the same team." As the days passed, things slowly returned to normal. The HOA wasn't a dictatorship anymore, and people actually seemed happier. But Ethan knew better than to assume it was over for good. People like Rick Coleman and Linda Shaw didn't just disappear. They had lost their power, but their type always found a way to creep back in. Ethan wasn't worried, though. He had learned an important lesson through all of this. You don't just trust that things will be fair. You make sure they stay that way. One evening, he sat in his backyard, looking at the now unlocked easement, sipping his coffee as the sun set. The HOA had tried to push him around, tried to break him down, and he had pushed back twice as hard. They had expected him to fold, to give in, to let them walk all over him like they had with so many others. They had been dead wrong. For now, though, Ethan was content. The fight was over, the neighborhood was in better hands, and he could finally enjoy his home in peace. But if the HOA ever tried to pull something like this again, he'd be ready.